Just so you all know. And we'll get rolling. Welcome, everyone. My name is Linda Lukasic. I'm the Executive Director at Environment Hamilton, and I'm joined tonight by Nancy Hurst. And many of you will know Nancy, of course. She's with Stop Sprawl Hammond, and she's also with Save Our Streams Hamilton. And I also have Don McLean here with us tonight. And Don is a co-founder of Environment Hamilton. He's a leader in Hamilton 350, involved with citizens at City Hall and active with Save Our Streams as well. So the three of us are going to walk you through tonight's session. But I wanted to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. I think that's really important, especially given the topic at hand. So just want to acknowledge that the land that we're situated on here in Hamilton is traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. It's the territory that's covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and directly adjacent to the Haldimand Tract, which is 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And this land was returned to Six Nations of the Grand River by the Haldimand Treaty of 1784. And the larger area, Southern Ontario, is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and many of you will be familiar with this already. I just think it's really, an apt sort of covenant. Again, given what we're talking about today, this is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas that bound them to peacefully share the territory and to protect that land. The single spoon reflects the need to share and to ensure that the bowl is never empty. So take just what you need. So this refers to taking care of the land and the creatures we share with it. There are no knives, and that reflects the need to protect and share in peace. And subsequent Indigenous nations and other peoples were invited into this covenant in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I just want to say that I'm really grateful for this opportunity to gather on this territory and to work in this community. And through this acknowledgement, I'm intending to honor and show gratitude to the original stewards of the land as a sign of respect and willingness to learn and heal. So together, may we care for this land and each other, being mindful of generations to come. And I can't think of anything more important these days than, embracing the current, but thinking far into the future. So I just want to say welcome, everyone. It's great to have so many of you here with us tonight. We're taking that important step tonight of exercising one of our core rights under Ontario's Environmental Bill of Rights, and that's the right to comment on an environmentally significant government proposal. And this one is pretty darn significant. I'm just gonna, make sure I can move the slides along here. Here we go. So tonight's workshop is going to help you to learn more about a number of core things. The Greenbelt areas in Hamilton that the Ford government is proposing to pull out for urban development, why these removals are completely unnecessary and highly problematic, what you should consider saying in your comments that you submit to the government, how to submit your comments online via the Environmental Registry of Ontario. And the deadline to do that is just before midnight on December 4th. And then finally, other actions you can take to stand up against Greenbelt destruction, Bill 23, and the Ford government decision to expand Hamilton's urban boundary to foist that on us. So I just wanted to share this overarching map because you've probably heard it's not just in Hamilton where there are parcels being removed, but the proposal from the Ford government involves 11 different areas where they're proposing to take chunks out, and this map shows those in those black boxes. In Hamilton, we have 3, and we're going to get into more detail about those 3 parcels tonight, but want to make sure that you are very aware that there are 11 parcels in total, and we'll share some information with you, including maps, if you want to get a better sense of what's happening in those other 8 parcels outside of Hamilton. And then you'll see there's just one area that shows the Greenbelt plan addition, the map that's proposing additions there. Just want to really emphasize that the government is proposing to pull out about 7,400 hectares for development. And you can see, all these parcels are right on the edge of urban areas in Hamilton. They're right on the edge of mostly rural areas. And they're only proposing to add 9,400 hectares. So they're arguing we're putting more in, but what we'll really emphasize tonight is that it's not like for like. So that area in the A box is part of the Periscope moraine. This is an area that many people were pushing for a long time to see added. We thought that was going to happen last year, and it's an important area to include. But this shouldn't be, there shouldn't be swaps happening in the first place, and it shouldn't involve pulling out prime agricultural land and replacing with a headwaters area. The headwaters area is worthy of protection, but it's not an equal exchange. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through the 3 parcels in Hamilton, and Don and Nancy, you may want to turn your cameras on, because the 3 of us are just going to walk through and talk to all of you about why pulling out these chunks of land is so problematic. So this is the first parcel, and it's up in the Ancaster area. It's sided by Garner Road, Shaver Road, and there's a bottom boundary there that's just south of Book, sort of wedged between Book Road and Butter. And then along the other side, I'm going to forget which road that is right along there. Nancy, help me here.
It's Fiddler's Green.
Is that Fiddler's?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So this is one of the, I think this is probably the largest parcel of the 3. And what we've done is we've also got, and I'm going to shift to this now, an aerial map, just so that you can all see, you know, this green box, which also shows some, you know, the darker green is natural heritage system. And then you can see here, it gives you a better sense of what some of the land uses are.
In the lower part.
So Nancy, did you want to dive in maybe and share a little bit about the history of this land that you're aware of and current uses and people you've talked to in the area?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned Butter Road, which is just halfway towards where that red line is. Yeah, it's down there exactly. During the stop sprawl thing and the Garner Marsh, trying to save the Garner Marsh, Kevin Butter, who is, I think, a 7th generation farmer from Butter Road. That's why Butter Road is called Butter Road. He reached out to me as, you know, we started chatting. So we've been in contact ever since. He's a fellow whose family farms in that area and all within the Greenbelt. And he's absolutely passionate about keeping that area protected for farming, because farmers in this area really, they own their land, but they rent land too. And I know that Janice Curry is on this call. She owns a number of acres in this area too, and Kevin Butter rents from her. So, you know, they're always looking for land to develop, or sorry, not develop, that's the opposite, land to farm. They're even looking, you know, around the airport. There are some fallow fields around the airport, and I know that farmers have reached out to councillors in the past and say, can we farm this land? They're always looking for land to farm. Anyhow, Kevin let me know that after the Greenbelt announcement happened, you know, that people talk to each other, and he had heard that 3 landowners in the Greenbelt area close to where he farms and where he lives had been approached by realtors asking for knocking on doors, asking if you'd like to sell your land. So normally acreages around there are around 18,000 per acre, or sorry, 18 million per acre. But they're offering 35. I'm sorry, I said million, I mean thousand, 18,000 per acre. But now they're suddenly offering 35,000 per acre now that this new announcement has been coming through. And he said that nobody wanted to sell, but that's only a matter of time, you know, that's a lot of money for people. So it's very difficult to turn that money down. Anyway, the buyers are already knocking on doors, is what I'm saying, in this area. And I think that the Spectator did a great article saying that most of this area is actually owned by farmers still, but that's only a matter of time, I'd say.
Yeah, great points, Nancy. And it's this sort of idea that, you know, this is what the Ford government has done, is really fueling that commodification of farmland and natural areas, not for the reasons that we want to see happen. And I think it's worth people remembering that the original vision of the Greenbelt and that protected area, it was never a vision that included swapping land out in the way that this government is doing here. Just imagine this constant marching outwards, right? This pushing out of the Greenbelt as urban areas continue to sprawl. It was really intended to check that urban sprawl and protect that land. So this is really taking us in a hugely problematic direction. But Don, I'm going to hand it over to you now to add to the concerns around all of this.
Thanks, Linda. And the piece that we're looking at, as you said, there are 3 pieces in Hamilton that are proposed for removal from the Greenbelt. This is by far the largest. The total hectares is, I think, 795 hectares. And this one makes up 727 of those 795. So this is the main block. And it's a curious piece of land. If you look on the right of the screen, that you see a white line coming in there on an angle, that's an airport runway, part of Hamilton Airport. And as a result of that runway and the direction it goes, staff are indicating that 2/3 of this area that Mr. Ford wants to be converted into residential development cannot be used for residential development because it's within the noise exclusion forecast area for the airport, which is, I believe, a federal rule. It suggests to me that whoever it was at the province who picked out what they were going to pull out hadn't done much research on it and didn't know what exactly they were doing. Because if you can't build houses on it, Mr. Ford's whole argument is that this is for building houses. And if 2/3 of it can't be used for that purpose, that seems pretty problematic for whoever it is that came up with the scheme to include this big block, the Book Road block, that is by far the largest piece of the Hamilton grouping. It's also, the staff have a report on this going to Planning Committee, I believe, tomorrow. And they have noted, first of all, the staff are taking the position that all 3 blocks they oppose. They should not be removed from the Greenbelt. They have taken the position that, and I can quote this, I think it's worth it, the city does not support the removal of lands from the Greenbelt plan because removal of the lands contradicts the vision and goals of the Greenbelt plan to provide permanent protection to the natural heritage and water resource systems that are crucial to sustain ecological and human health and build resilience to and mitigate climate change. And the city has no requirement for additional lands to accommodate housing growth to 2051. So a pretty strong statement. That's the lead paragraph in the staff report going to Planning Committee tomorrow. And I would assume that the councillors that Planning Committee overwhelmingly will agree with and support that position. The area also includes, and if you go back to your first slide, your slide previous to this, Linda.
Yep.
As they point out, that dark area is natural heritage zone that is a part of, identified within the Greenbelt plan. So areas that are particularly ecologically sensitive make up a very substantial portion of these lands. And I would think that everything on the right of that approximately is probably the area that is encompassed within the Niagara Escarpment or the noise exclusion forecast zone, so it can't be used for housing development or other sensitive uses. So I think that's a pretty interesting feature of this. And if you read the staff report, it's quite interesting from the perspective that they know these lands. These are planners who have been in Hamilton and do Hamilton planning for a long time. And they have some perceptive comments that suggest that the decisions of what lands would be pulled out was pulled out of a hat or handed to them by somebody else, and we might guess who that might be, but not done on any kind of thinking about what would actually be possible to turn into housing developments and housing subdivisions.
Yeah, thanks for all of that, Don. That's I'm just going to hop back to this one. The other interesting thing to bear in mind too is that there would be huge servicing issues with these lands. So normally when you're looking at urban growth, when you do find yourself in that situation where you need to expand a boundary, you do it on the periphery of the existing urban, right? So that you can just build on to what you've got. And this, these parcels have been plonked out here with the Ford government then saying these kinds of pieces, that they're going to be prioritized to address the housing crisis. And it leaves us all wondering, what the heck? I mean, if they're completely unserviced, doesn't it make a lot more sense to focus on an approach like what the city of Hamilton was already doing? Emphasize that growth within the urban boundary within already serviced areas where we know development could happen more quickly, and it's far more likely to address one of the real issues that this government doesn't like to talk about, and that's the housing affordability crisis. So this doesn't seem like a very viable solution. Nancy, did you want to add anything else when it comes to this parcel before we jump on to the next one?
Only that I know that there's a farm market there that's really beloved in Ancaster called Lindley's Farm Market. They're a U-pick strawberry place. And I approached them last time I went strawberry picking there in the summer 2 years ago, because I had approached a lot of farmers, and they were all in favor of keeping the boundary firm, except for Mr. Lindley. He was 100% behind boundary expansion because he had his reasons. It's hard, farming is hard, and he wanted out. So I was interested that this particular parcel got included when he told me at length during that session that he definitely wanted this parcel, his parcel for sure, to be urbanized.
Yeah,
I wonder if there are others.
Sad those stories, and on the one hand, you understand things are tough for farmers. On the other hand, you can't help but recognize that we only have so much prime farmland. And it kind of speaks to the fact that even though we've got that green belt, maybe government didn't do enough. I know in other jurisdictions, they've done a lot of work to keep farmland in the hands of farmers. And that involves kind of creative ways to help to shift away from this broken system that we still see here, where land speculation is driving the gobbling up, and also, leaving farmers feeling like that's the best option for them,
right?
Moving into the future. All right, I'm going to jump on to the next parcel. So this is the second piece. We keep calling it the White Church lands because this is White Church Road right along the northern stretch of this property. So this one's sort of kitty corner to some of the weird urban expansion that's happened up around the Hamilton Airport area. But again, as Dawn has pointed out, this darker area on the Greenbelt map denotes natural heritage system, so important features in there. And this green is all currently Greenbelt as well. So I'm going to do the same, jump to the next slide, but that shows you outlined in red those lands. And this is an interesting piece too, for a lot of the same reasons that we've already spoken to, with respect to the Ancaster parcel. I keep telling people this is like a weird strip of floating land that'll mostly be surrounded by rural and Greenbelt. If it does go ahead, just trying to imagine, I was saying it's almost like a Binbrook 2, right? In terms of what we're going to see there. But Nancy, Dawn, did you want to weigh in at all on this parcel and what the implications could be?
Well, I wanted to maybe ask you, because when speaking to the spec reporter who was digging up these parcels, he told me that it's right across the street from the White Belt White Church land. So yeah, I don't know. Is that what you think, Linda? Is that because there is a strip of White Belt here, which is what was possibly going to be expanded onto during the urban boundary expansion, although city staff didn't recommend this area because it's actually so far from the city itself. But I think what the reporter told me is that this Greenbelt area is across the road from the White Belt area. So it would actually mean two sort of areas. Oh, Don's got his hand up. Maybe he knows more.
Go for it, Don.
That's good information, Nancy. I just want to add something else that's of interest. If you go to mapping of this area, not the map that we have here, you can see some streams going through this. Those streams go south, and then they connect into the Welland River and end up in feeding the Binbrook Conservation Area and on to the Niagara region, along the Welland River watershed. When we were doing work around the Aerotropolis, the Airport Employment Growth District, one of the things that was raised by staff at that point as a concern is that these lands don't drain properly for sewers. So in Hamilton, our sewer lines are intended to drain to the Woodward Avenue sewage treatment plant and the Dundas one and so on. They use gravity to get there. But anything that you start developing, which is draining in another direction, you have to pump the sewage uphill to get it to a point where it will run downhill to Woodward Avenue. And this piece of land looks to me like one where any development that takes place there, the sewage would have to be pumped uphill. And that's a significant expenditure, an ongoing expenditure, in addition to the whole issues of how do you service these lands. And as you're pointing out, there's very little, there's a big area between White Church Road and the nearest areas to the north of it that are already residential. There is this pocket coming out of Mount Hope, but this is not really adjacent to development at this point, and as a result, its servicing costs are going to be particularly significant. And this is, as you know, in terms of numbers, this is the second largest piece. This piece is 64 hectares. It's all prime agricultural. There aren't any servicing plans at this point for it. It hasn't even been evaluated for what the natural features are here and what might need to be particularly significant and protected. That's all something that would have to be done in the future. And one of the things that, if you follow the legislation that Mr. Ford is putting forward in terms of pulling these pieces out of the Greenbelt, is they have to be built on by 2025. You can't likely, and the staff are certainly raising this, the great difficulty in terms of actually being able to do the evaluation, examine the area, and then do a secondary plan for it, and figure out how you're going to service it and get it serviced in a very short time, 3 years. It's just, it looks not feasible. And officially in the legislation, they're saying if the developers don't build on these things by 2025, we're going to take them back, put them back in the Greenbelt. So who knows what all that means. But again, it's the sort of pick a piece of land that fills the amount of land that you want. Don't look at what is actually there. Don't look at how it's connected or disconnected. Just throw it in. And that's one of the strong impressions I'm getting from what they're doing in Hamilton.
Yeah, makes the cynical me wonder, you know, is this just a massive land grab? Because it certainly isn't feeding into orderly planning. I think if anything, this provincial government has dropped an atomic bomb on the orderly planning framework, you know, that used to exist in the province of Ontario that municipalities were following. Nancy, did you want to add to what Don just said?
Well, I just was remembering the article from the spec. This piece of land, I think, is the White Church Road. So it says Paletta International Corporation, 31 acres on White Church Road. This property has been in the Paletta family since the 70s. And in 2019, the family's real estate holdings were described as the largest in Hamilton and Halton combined. So maybe that's why this particular piece was brought in. I don't know, just a wild guess.
Let me add to that. We're in a battle here, and there's concern about, okay, what do we do? How do we win this battle? I think it's important to think about the long game, because that's certainly the way the developers and speculators have been thinking about it. There's a piece of land that's across from Donna Skelly's office that's farmland. And it's got a development sign because the people there are hoping to get it into the urban boundary. The new changes to the official plan imposed by the Ford government will put it into the urban boundary. I know somebody who was living in one of the farmhouses on that land, moved there in 1984. And at that point, those lands were owned by developers. That's 38 years. They've been waiting to get to cash in on land that they probably paid a few $100s for per acre, and now would expect to turn into something much more valuable, and hundreds and thousands of dollars per lot. So they play a
Yeah.
long game.
Oops.
I just
And,
took over because I wanted to show
There's the
people.
land.
Oh, okay, thanks.
And the, if you look at it, it's just down over here behind these trees is the house that Susan here lived in, for rented from a farmer there. So it was already, this was already developed,
Sorry, Linda.
That's okay, Nancy, no worries.
Speculating.
I'm glad that you put that up there so people could see. Yeah, Dawn, it's funny because, at the start of this meeting, we were talking about thinking multiple generations into the future, and it's almost, that's a problematic kind of planning for the future, given the impacts that this whole history of land speculation and urban expansion. It's left us with a challenging legacy that we're still struggling with. Okay, so we are going to move on to the next parcel, which, is an interesting one. This one is in Lower Stony Creek. So maybe just so you know, so there's Highway 8, and this is 50 Road down towards Queen Elizabeth Way, and this is Barton Street right here. And I just want to, again, you can see some Greenbelt lands here, and an area in dark that's part of the Natural Heritage System. And then just so you all know, this blue area is they've designated 50 Creek. They've got an urban river valley designation under the Greenbelt plan for that area, and that was a recent addition. And it's this little parcel right here in Hamilton. That's the third parcel proposed for removal. But while we're on this map, I also want to make you all aware that there's a sizable chunk of land right here in Grimsby that's also proposed for removal. And my understanding is that a good portion of this parcel, if not all of it, is owned by New Horizons. And it's Pacan is the developer who's involved there. So in both of these locations too, I think it's also valuable and important to recognize that this whole strip of Lower Stony Creek and heading along into the Niagara region is tender fruit lands. The microclimate at the toe of the escarpment is what makes it possible to grow peaches and grapes and all of that wonderful fruit that we get from the Niagara Peninsula. We've developed most of our tender fruit land heading back into Hamilton, but this area is obviously, that microclimate still exists. This area is important for that reason. So this is the parcel, and I'm again going to show you an aerial. It was a little bit tough. I attempted to draw the lines, but there's Barton Street, there's 50 Road. It's an area that sort of goes like this in here. If you can you see my cursor moving around it? Okay, just want to make sure. So you can see that it's an area that is already, this is a school, actually. There's a Catholic school right here, and there's a lot of development and more coming because pre-amalgamation, City of Stony Creek essentially brought the lands pretty much all along this swath north of Highway 8 are all now within urban Hamilton and will ultimately be developed. But this parcel right here still sits outside of that and is still technically part of the Greenbelt. The proposal is now to pull it out. But interestingly, as Dawn has pointed out, city staff are saying no to this one as well. Just got me thinking, what could happen there, if it stays in the Greenbelt with close proximity to an urban river valley system and a natural heritage feature, but as well that microclimate, kind of neat to have, a suburban tender fruit farm market with a farm stand by the side of the road. I don't know, just got me thinking what else could be happening with an approach to land use if a parcel like this stays within the Greenbelt rather than being pulled out. Dawn, Nancy, any comments on this one?
Let me try something here. This is an interesting piece. If you go back to 5 or 6 years ago, the Wynne government did the required 10-year review of the Greenbelt plan. And there were some attempts being made at that point in the Hamilton area and elsewhere to pull things out of the Greenbelt by developers. And this piece was one of the pieces that they attempted to get out. It was among 4 or 5 pieces that City Council of the day, this is 2015, 2016, 2017, argued should be pulled out of the Greenbelt. So at that point, they had an idea, appeared to have an idea that if they traded some things and offered some other areas to go into the Greenbelt, that they could convince the provincial government that they could take some pieces out. They didn't succeed. And this particular piece is not being supported by staff either. They don't want it taken out of the Greenbelt, despite the fact that that was an official position of the previous city council. It wasn't a position of planning staff. Planning staff were told by the previous council to put this on the list of things that the city wanted removed from the Greenbelt. And we know the developers who are involved in this, they're quite prominent in the community, or at planning committee and whatever. And I remember them trying several times, because the process that the Wynne government used, much different than the one being used by Mr. Ford, was an iterative consultative process that went through at least 3 full rounds, in which the province made some proposals. They were responded to by municipalities and the public. On the basis of those comments, they made modified proposals, and that went through 3 full rounds. It took a couple of years of consultation, more than 2 years of consultation, before they finally made their decision. And that decision was to keep this piece of land within the Greenbelt. But planning staff are not going to support that one either, despite the fact that a previous council did. And that may be a reflection of planning staff maybe feeling a little more comfortable that they've got a council now that is going to back them up and is going to fight for the things that all of us want to fight for as well. Just speculation on my part, but I think it's got some basis.
Yeah, we're in interesting times when you contrast provincial and municipal, that's for sure. Okay, so we wanted to just share, and we've already started to speak to this, but just wanted to share with all of you and give you a better sense of who will benefit. And I think it's fair to say that the developers stand to benefit the most, and these are some of the prominent players when we talk about these parcels of land in Hamilton. So you've already heard reference to Paletta International Corporation. We've got Mr. Silvio de Gasperis, who Nancy's going to talk about a little bit more as well in a moment. And DiCenzo is also a prominent local player. So these are all developers with interest in these Greenbelt properties who, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, because some of them as well have property in those white belt lands. And when you hear us talking about white belt, it's that land wedged between where the urban boundary ends and the green belt begins. So Hamilton has that whole swath of land as well, even before you get to green belt, that hasn't been developed yet, that we, you know, collectively succeeded in preventing the city from expanding into. So this is a crazy moving way beyond that, but these players are certainly engaged in both of those areas. And that sure has become clear with this proposal to remove parcels from the Greenbelt. I'm just going to go on to the next, and Nancy, I'll hand over to you to tell this story.
Sure. Well, this is kind of on the next slide, but from what I only just.
Do you want me to jump ahead, Nancy, and then we can go back?
Yeah, sure.
Ahead.
Go to that one first, then.
Yeah.
Sure. So it's called the DRAP, which is Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve, which some citizens really tried their best, and they succeeded in 2003. Or I don't remember how long ago it was, but many years ago, they managed to get this this particular chunk of land into the Greenbelt and into a further protection of this reserve. But Silvio de Gasperis, was buying up the farmland, for years, wanting always to turn it into a housing development. And I guess at that point, Dalton McGuinty's government was opposing it. And eventually their many years of trying ended in a failure, and the land was preserved into the, I guess it's called the DRAP, the agricultural preserve. Even though De Gasperis took them to court, it failed, and it has remained protected ever since. But the interesting quote that I heard from the
Two red doors.
could you mute? Okay, thanks. The interesting quote that I read from the CBC article was that McGuinty has hurt me and I'm going to hurt him back. And I think he's now long beyond McGuinty, but he might get his way now that Bill 23 has just passed and this Greenbelt development is going ahead or being pushed through. So I don't know, go back to the other slide, Linda. And the other thing I read was that I think it was, I don't remember if it was the Star or the CBC now, has just said that they originally found 4 or so properties in here, but now they've just done a subsequent re-examination and they have discovered so many more of this parcel is owned by the De Gasperis family, because they use obviously different names and numbered companies, and you really need to do a deep dive to figure out who the real owners who the real owners are. But again, a good portion of this is the De Gasperis family.
Yeah, and just heartbreaking to think that we're going to see the transition of what's described as an agricultural preserve into potentially into more expansion outwards.
Mm-hmm. And I just while we're sitting here, I think I added another slide, Linda. Can you just advance?
Is there one beyond?
Yeah.
Oh yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now this you can't comment on this particular piece through an environmental registry, because they've lumped this in with Bill 39, which is the Strong Mayor's Bill. It's being called the Better Municipal Governance Bill or something like this. That's Schedule 1 of that bill, which is the Strong Mayor. But Schedule 2, they've popped this in here, Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve Repeal Act. And if you read it, it's just odious how it's written. The new act provides that the easements and covenants that were described in the Repeal Act are deemed to have the legal effect that they would have had if it had never been in effect. It basically takes it back to when the land was never protected. So if you want to comment on this one, it's done through a different means than the environmental registry. You have to go to the, what's it called? It's the same one as Bill 23, the Standing Committee on Heritage, Infrastructure, and Cultural Policy. It's just a different route to get in there. But once you've clicked a couple of times, you'll get to the text box where you can write your comments. And I'm sure that Linda is going to follow up with an action sheet, and there will likely be a link to that there. But the important thing to notice about this is that the deadline to comment with a written submission is 7 p.m. Thursday, December 1st. So 2 days from now.
Okay. And I did forget to mention at the start that we are going to provide an action sheet to everyone, just so that you've got all the details you need to be able to prepare your comments. So yeah, we'll be sure, Nancy, to include a link for this one too, so people can just click and proceed. And thank you for that. So I just came up with a bulleted list of why these removals are completely unnecessary, just as a talking point for us. And you know, collectively, so many of us have been involved in fighting to stop sprawl, and we know that the city of Hamilton itself submitted an urban growth plan to the province through its amended official plan, a viable plan to accommodate growth to 2051 that we know conforms with provincial policy, because that was the obligation on the planning side, was to achieve that. But what happened was that plan, we all know now, was submitted to the province and rejected by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we haven't seen any meaningful justification for that refusal. But there's strong arguments to be made that even if population and job projections and the province establishes those, municipalities have to comply with them even if they were increased beyond the current, there would still be no need to expand Hamilton's urban boundary into the Greenbelt. And again, you heard us say this already, I'm going to say it again. The province's proposal to expand the Greenbelt will not address the affordability crisis. And there are many experts out there who are saying it's not going to speed up the construction of housing. Most of these tracts of land are not serviced, and it's crazy to think that that's our quick way to, dealing with affordability and dealing with housing supply. And then just on, Don already made reference to this. If you don't believe us, our own planning staff this is the planning staff recommendation that's going before our city's planning committee tomorrow. And they're emphasizing that they don't support the removal of these lands. They make it clear that they don't believe that what's being proposed satisfies the visions and goals of the Greenbelt plan. So there's good information here too that can help you with what you're submitting. In your comments, you may even want to say our planning division doesn't support this. By the time you do your submission, you may be able to say, hopefully, our city council doesn't support this. And then they also make it clear that there's no requirement for additional lands to accommodate additional housing, given the other recent expansions. So they're directly pointing at, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing forced the city to expand the urban boundary. So we really don't need this land because they've done that. But never mind the fact that we already submitted a plan that didn't require any expansion at all. I'm going to pause there and ask Nancy and Dawn, do you have anything you want to add just in terms of, why this is completely unnecessary and the perspectives that city planning staff have shared?
Let me add a little bit. One of the things that's in the staff report, and they repeat it several times, let me just quote a little bit of it. There is no supporting documentation provided by the province to support the removal of the lands from the Greenbelt. No rationale has been provided to address the need for additional residential land supply in the city of Hamilton. Furthermore, no documentation has been provided to explain why the proposed removal sites were selected for removal from the plan. And you work in a situation that you can, you think about a normal process. You may have a disagreement with somebody. They may propose something you disagree with, but they normally are required by normal process to explain why are they wanting to do this. And then you've got some basis say, well, no, I don't agree with you, and this is why. But the Ford government, the progressive conservative government, provincial government of Ontario, doesn't seem to operate that way. And it's another dramatic undermining of basic democracy and basic rights of the people of the province to have a government which is honest and straightforward and puts forward rational positions or irrational ones, but at least explains what it's doing. It's not doing that. And you heard that from Linda, that they also have not done that with respect to ordering Hamilton to expand its urban boundary, despite the fact that council voted 13-3 against that. Everybody who ran for council in the last election in October ran on a platform of no expansion of the urban boundary. There was massive public support for that position, and but it just gets imposed nevertheless. It's a very frustrating process.
Yeah, it sure is, and it seems to, I think we've all come to depend on and expect sound planning practice, and feels like that's just non-existent here. So we've pulled together just a recap slide with just some major categories you want to think about, and in terms of what to say in your written comments. So and this was me, so I know Dawn and Nancy, you may want to speak to some of this too, just highlighting some key themes, including Greenbelt protection. I think that's a pretty obvious one. And we're all recognizing that it's more urgent than ever before in a climate emergency to ensure we've got food security moving forward, to maintain and hopefully enhance that climate resilience that's provided by those open lands. Protection and enhancement of biodiversity. We're about to see COP15 begin, and biodiversity should be top of mind. And that Greenbelt also includes important headwater systems, wetlands, groundwater systems. There's so many reasons that we need to see that land remain protected. And then I just on the flip of that, because you think about the Greenbelt plan and growth management in Ontario, it's sort of like yin and yang, they work together. And that climate emergency also means providing the needs to promote more compact, complete communities rather than heading in this direction. And I think in your comments, it's probably worth speaking to that and recognizing that that was the original intent of these approaches to regional level planning in the province. And this is the Conservative government, so throw in the financials. You were hearing lots of damning reports coming out of municipalities who are figuring out what it's going to cost, you know, the infrastructure costs to service these lands on the fringe. And for us in Hamilton, we've already got a huge infrastructure deficit. And do we all want to be subsidizing that outward growth? And then the last thing I'll touch on too is other thoughts. And we always encourage community members when you're preparing and submitting formal comments to feel comfortable speaking in your own words about the key issues and speak from the heart, because I think in all of this, we can't lose that. We can't lose that important messaging from community members to government explaining why you're concerned, why you want to see things change. Maybe you're thinking about kids and grandkids or other family members, or for whatever reason, those points are worth integrating into your comments too. But I'm gonna just look to Dawn and Nancy as well, if you wanted to elaborate on any of that recap.
I could just mention housing affordability. You did mention about building within the urban boundary, and it's just so, it's such a it's a no-brainer to think that building just even slightly denser housing, even duplexes, triplexes, or quads within the urban footprint where they are already close to jobs and close to transit and the amenities that people need. That's what affordable housing is. And this situation here and the Bill 23 situation, just all of it, you know, is under the guise of building housing, but it's only going to be building expensive housing that most people can't afford. So if we really want decent, affordable housing, we do need to build it within the urban footprint. I'm probably speaking to the converted here, but
no, but well said, Nancy. I think that's important to keep on emphasizing that, that reality.
Yeah,
Dawn, did you want to jump in?
Let me add just in the same direction. There are countries in the world who build housing for the people in their communities. We've turned it all over to the private sector, and there are a whole lot of problems associated with that. One being that they make a lot of profit, and so the cost of housing is much higher as a result of being built by the private sector. But it's also they build it when they think they can make the most money. So there are thousands of houses that have been approved for construction in Hamilton within the urban boundary, which there's no construction going on. They sit on it because it may be, oh, the market's down a little bit. We're not going to get $1 million for these. We're only going to get 950,000 or whatever. So they wait until the time when they think they can get the best situation. That may also be being complicated at this point by supply chain problems. It may be being complicated by labor, insufficient workers to do this construction work. So the expectation that the Premier can wave his magic wand and suddenly there's going to be all kinds of houses is not one which is probably reasonable or practical, but it's also going entirely in the wrong direction. That we can produce and get housing for the people in our communities through public housing processes, through processes that have largely been abandoned in Canada, particularly since neoliberalism took control in about 1980. And we don't have much in the way of federal doing that, and we don't have much at all in the provincial doing that. And as a result, we end up with a shortage of housing that people can actually afford. It doesn't look like there's actually a shortage of houses out there, because if you look at the prices right now, they've been going down for some time. And the laws of supply and demand that we supposedly live by would say if the price is going down, there's no shortage. There's a surplus, if anything, of houses out there.
Yeah, and great point, Don, about the non-market housing. And maybe one thing that I'll share with people in the action sheet is a link to a really great video that I watched recently, and it's been put out through Van City Credit Union, that tells the story of non-market housing in a Vancouver context, but it really nicely explains how in jurisdictions where government is more involved, and not just in deeply affordable housing, but more affordable housing, that if there are enough units, it actually drives down especially with rentals, the cost for the market rentals, because they have to compete with that stock of government owned housing. So really interesting dynamic when you start to think about it, but I'll share that for people. That video tells the story in a really nice, clear way. Nancy.
Just quickly, I met with some friends on the weekend who are both realtors who told me it's a buyer's market. There's 4 months worth of housing inventory available right now. There's no, he just said what Dawn said to me. Just from a realtor's perspective, he said it's to do with high interest rates. That's what's the crunch here, but it's not to do with lack of housing. There is lots of housing. So just wanted to offer that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nancy. All right, so I'm gonna just very quickly now shift into walking all of you through the Environmental Bill of Rights and the registry, just so that for anyone who isn't aware of the Environmental Bill of Rights or hasn't used the registry before, you'll get just a really basic, EBR and Environmental Registry of Ontario 101 in the next 5 minutes. So Ontario does have a Bill of Rights. We've had it since, I can't see the date, I think since the early 1990s. And we're lucky because not every jurisdiction has a Bill of Rights. Not going to lie, this current government has mucked with it. So you probably remember in the first term of the Ford government, they eliminated that arm's length role of the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. And the commissioner is essentially the watchdog to make sure that our rights are being upheld, our environmental rights under the bill. But the bill does still exist, and it includes rights like our basic right to notification, and that happens through the online registry. We all have a right to comment. That's what we're talking about tonight, is exercising that right to comment on certain government decisions affecting the environment. And then there are other rights like the right to request a review or investigation and a right to seek leave to appeal that we can't talk about tonight, but know that there are other rights and it's worth checking it out. So I've just provided the link to the webpage if anyone wants to explore further. This is what the environmental registry looks like on the homepage. So I'm just going to take you, imagine we're clicking the search the registry button, takes you to this page, and you can enter keywords and do a search. So I've put Greenbelt in there, and then you just hit search. And what we will do in the action sheet is we'll actually provide you with the direct link to the posting that you want to be commenting on by December 4th, but you can try fiddling with the search engine. This is interesting to do to also pay attention to what's happening in your community. So even searching Hamilton and finding active postings will often, make you aware of things you weren't aware of before. So here we go. When you click on Greenbelt and you pull up the right proposal, you can see it's open for comment till December 4th. And there are lots of other details here around the type of notice. It's a policy notice about the Greenbelt Act. And this is important to pay attention to. Here's the deadline for commenting and the button you need to click to submit a comment. And then know as well, and I couldn't fit it all on the screen, but you'll see when you get to the site that there's more information if you keep scrolling down. So there are proposal details and supporting materials, including those maps that we shared with you tonight. And then there's a way to connect with the relevant ministry as well on the posting. And I just also wanted to show you that when you click that submit a comment button, this is what pops in. You'll see, for me, this automatically popped up because I have set up an account. You can register. I find it useful because you can follow this consultation or start to follow other consultations, and they'll notify you when decisions have been posted and that sort of thing. It also keeps a whole running record of your submitted comments, so I can go back in. But you can also comment without registering. So if you just want to get in there and submit your comments by the deadline, you can do that, and you don't have to set up an account. So you click this button here. I didn't show the box, but when you do click on commenting, it's just like a regular text box that will pop up, and they'll ask you for information like your name, whether you're commenting as an individual or on behalf of an organization. And they also take privacy very seriously. So one thing that I found is that because at the end of the day, when they post the final decision on the Greenbelt proposal, they'll indicate how many people submitted comments. And if they determine that you submitted a comment that doesn't have any, that there's nothing private that they need to avoid posting, they'll include your comments so that anybody else could go and look at what you had to say. So if you want to make sure that happens, what I always do, and I do this even when I'm commenting for Environment Hamilton, is I'll put a little note at the very top of the text box before I hit submit. And I'll say, there's nothing in this submission that I'm concerned about you posting publicly. And it's just an indication to them that I'm totally fine with Environment Hamilton's comments being out there for public consumption. If you don't want your comments posted publicly, then you could certainly indicate that as well. But if you don't indicate, they often try to find reasons not to share them, which I always find a little bit frustrating because I think a lot of people find it helpful to be able to read what others have said. So that's the process, and we'll provide all those links to you so that you just have to click on a link to get to the posting, and you'll be able to easily walk through preparing and submitting your comments. And again, the deadline for that is by 11:59 in the evening on December the 4th. And I'm just going to jump to this slide and hand it over to Nancy on some other ways you can get involved.
So we have been really trying to jam the phone lines of the two local MPPs, PC MPPs, so that would be Donna Skelly and Neil Lumsden. Although I watched them both stand up in the legislature today and happily vote for Bill 23. So I still think it's worth phoning them though, because and also Doug Ford. I just think the more messages they get, the better. And I remember being at a rally in Toronto a few years ago when he was first elected, when he wanted to cut funding for autism and class sizes, and there's a lot of people there and he caved. So who knows, maybe we can get this thing turned around too. Anyway, the phone numbers are there. Those are for their local constituency offices, and Monday to Friday somebody will answer and you can leave a message, or after hours and on the weekends there's an answering service that will take the message. So I gave this poor woman a very long message to type. She was very patient with me. There's a website that the Wellington Water Watchers have set up called greenbeltpromise.ca, and if you click on that, it will go to the Take Action page. Then it's one of those, it's a button where, well, first of all, you put in your postal code so that it knows who your MPP is, and then you click a button and your phone will ring. And it will say, okay, are you ready to give Ford a call? And then it'll call him. So you don't even have to dial the number. You just click the button and Doug Ford will call you. I think that's the first time that'll ever happen, and probably the last. So that's an easy way. There's lots of easy ways to phone. And I think emails are also important, and phones. And I met this wonderful guy yesterday who is a constituent of Donna Skelly's. I met him at the rally, and he told me he got an hour-long conversation with Donna because he's a constituent. And he said the trick is to say, I have some money to donate. And he told her that, so she called him back. And then he told me later, I'm going to donate it to environmental defense. I didn't say I'm going to donate it to her. But anyway, it did earn him a phone call. So that might be a way to actually get a meeting with your MPP, if that's what you're after. Okay, and I think there's one more slide there.
Oh, is there, Nancy? Okay.
Yeah, which I threw in at the end. So we've been having rallies for the last number of weeks, pop-up rallies all around. We were in Dundurn and Ancaster and Skelly's and on the mountain and at different MPP's offices. But I think we're going to be culminating, and well, this might not be the last one, but there's going to be another one next weekend, next Sunday. It's coinciding with Provincial Day of Action. It's going to be a weekend of action, which will be a sort of a hands across the Greenbelt themed event. So ours will be at City Hall, December 4th at 1 p.m. It's there. These rallies are really a great atmosphere, lots of fun. There's lots of elders, there's lots of young kids. People bring a lawn chair to just sit down and wave at traffic from the comfortable spot of their chair. We've had some music at a few of them. And we really invite everybody, please, we're going to be spreading this far and wide to get as many people down to City Hall as possible on December 4th at 1 p.m. just to really bring it home that you can't pave our green belt. That's not what we want. And if you want to find out more information about where the rallies will be, then get onto the Stop Sprawl Hammond newsletter, which you can do at the website, which is at the bottom there, ssho.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. One thing I was going to mention quickly too, just in terms of the formal comments you write up for submission through the environmental registry, I always work on the comments in like a Word document outside of that system, then cut and paste it in so that I have it for my files. But it also makes it easy if you want to email those comments, and a quick email to your MPP to say, hey, just FYI, I'm really concerned about this issue. Here's what I submitted formally through the registry. You should consider doing that well and really, milk that comment writing energy for all that it's worth. It's another helpful thing that you can do. And then, of course, come out to the rallies. The rallies are getting bigger and louder and more passionate. And I think it's really important we continue to grow them. I'm going to stop sharing because I think we just want to open it up now to, if people have any questions they want to ask us. I'm going to stop share and feel free if there's anything that we talked about tonight that you wanted to ask about a little bit further, or if maybe there are issues that you thought maybe we should have emphasized that you want to make sure people are aware of, feel free. And I think maybe to keep this manageable, we'll just ask people, I hope you're all aware how to, under the reactions icon, you can raise your hand. So please raise your hand if you've got something you'd like to add to the conversation, and we'll make sure that we go in order as hands go up.
I just want to add that also, while you've got your letter writing jive on, send one to the spec. They've been pretty good with publishing letters. Letters to the editor can be sent to, there, I just put it in the chat, letters@thespec.com. A letter should be less than 250 words. And if you're feeling really like you've really got something to say, then you can submit an op-ed, and very often they'll publish that too. And I'll put down in the chat here in a second who to send the op-ed to, but those should be, I think, around 600 words, no more than 600 words for an op-ed, an opinion piece. But that's another way to reach a lot of people that might not be connected to social media and things like that.
Yeah, great suggestion, Nancy. Deborah, I see your hand up. Why don't you unmute and go for it?
Thanks, Linda. Thank you, Don and Nancy, for putting this together. I recognize that the rallies are also supporting all of you who are interfacing on the front line with all of this. And your action is so very much appreciated. I don't know what we would be doing if it wasn't for all of you who are leading the parade on this. So thank you for that. This is new to me. The whole process of rallies and speaking out is new to me. And I'm just wondering, what's the next phase? I asked the photojournalist from the spec at the rally on Sunday if he thought that the rallies were indeed making a difference. And he said at some point, like most things, the rallies start to become sort of white noise. And I'm not sure if I completely agree with that. I think it's so important to keep on rallying. But in addition to that, what would be sort of the next phase, if you will, if Bill 21 continues to proceed? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Don, you want to dive in and start to answer that one?
I can try. It isn't a very good question. I think we need to be committed to a long game, that this is not necessarily going to result in what we want in the short term, but the actual implementation of both the of all three of these pieces, the expansion of the Greenbelt, cutting into the Greenbelt, the expansion of the urban boundary, and the Bill 23, and indeed the municipal mayor's super mayor kind of thing. They're all going to be very complicated for those who want to benefit from them to actually succeed in benefiting from them. And it's pretty reasonable to anticipate, to speculate that this were certainly being applauded by some developers, and they were certainly probably being coached, the provincial government's being coached to go in this direction. But if you want to actually put a development in the ground, there's a bunch of things that have to happen. And we've already got city councilors who are saying, we're not going to make those things happen. So there's going to be resistance, and that resistance is going to carry on for an extended period of time. If you want to make a difference in the next election, which is 4 years away, one of the ways of doing that is to continue the resistance in various forms. And a major piece of that, I think, will be the fact that this whole process, these changes are not only very much opposed by municipal officials, including municipal councillors, who are essentially being told, you don't count. It doesn't matter you went out and got elected, doesn't matter you're a city councillor, we're in charge, and you guys are irrelevant to this, or minor players entirely. That's rubbing a lot of political people the wrong way, and I don't think they're going to forget about it. I think they're going to do their best to make sure that they rub the opposite direction. So certainly one of the pieces that's going to be significant here is the cost. And the Municipal Association of Municipalities of Ontario, which has generally been a pretty quiet little lapdog, has been rejected entirely by the provincial government. They didn't even get a chance to make a submission to the standing committee, which they were quite shocked about. It's a pretty conservative organization, and municipal governments have generally been pretty conservative in terms of how they approach things. I think you're going to see a lot more revolt coming from there, and that will be enhanced and inspired by what we do in the streets and what we do to our councillors and so on. But looking at the situation in Hamilton, we look to have a lot of allies in the staff, allies among the councillors, and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario did a really quick calculation of some of the financial impacts. They figure it will cost municipal governments $1 billion a year minimum. That's got to come from somewhere. And that most likely is going to come from, we've got to raise taxes. If the councillors have any sense, they will be saying every time taxes go up, this isn't because of us. This is because of the Ford government. The Ford government is the one who's pushing up your property taxes. They're the ones who created this situation. They're the ones you should be blaming. And you should remember that when we get to the next election, if not before.
Thanks for that, Don. Before I go to Lucia, I just want to acknowledge Helen in the comments has pointed out as well that there are various related pieces of legislation open for comment as well. There are a whole raft of them. So we've presented tonight, and tonight it's hardly a bite-sized chunk. This is a pretty significant proposal, but maybe what we could do is we'll include links to those other opportunities to comment, so that once you're comfortable with this one, you can give those a try as well. In fact, we've got those in a chart on a page on the Environment Hamilton website already. So we'll make sure that we share that, but thank you for highlighting that. And Lucia, am I saying it right? You and I just met face to face the other day. Is it Lucia? Is that how you say it?
Lucia, yes.
Okay, thanks. There you go, Lucia.
No worries. Just wondering if there's any levers we can pull going up. Yes, on the municipal level, we can certainly get involved. Are there any federal appeals that we might be able to do? I know that I'd attended a webinar with Environmental Defense, and they had talked about trying to get an impact assessment to stall the 413 until after the next election. That's sort of the game plan. Is there a similar kind of route for us to take with some of these other new things that Doug Ford has rolled out?
That's a good question, and I wish Michelle Tom was on the call, because I know that there is some petitioning happening focused at the federal level, but she would be, I don't know if Dawn or Nancy are I signed it, but I'm gonna say I'm not, I haven't
The
really
little-
immersed myself in the mechanics of what's happening with that piece. So I think there are some ways creative ways to try to generate pressure to get the federal government to step in. I mean, I think at a bigger picture level, I can't help but wonder, I mean, you'll all remember in the first term of the Ford government, challenges with the Ford government doing anything serious in the way of climate planning, and the feds having to come in and say, you know, the provincial environmental plan wasn't a climate plan, and pushing back in that way. So part of me wonders whether that's not an angle. We start to look at climate implications of all of this because they're huge. But I don't know. Dawn, you may you may have a better sense of whether there's any possibility there. I don't know that there's going to be the need for any sort of federal environmental assessment with any of what's happening here, but the climate piece might work.
Nancy's got her hand up. I'll let her go first here. I've got a couple of thoughts on this as well.
Well,
Nancy?
just quickly, just with regard to those petitions, the little I know about them, that we were circulating 2 of them at the rallies. One was on a provincial one on Bill 23, and the other one was the federal one for the 413. And as Michelle did point out, the Highway 413 is kind of the driver for a lot of this, no pun intended. But really, when you open up a vast swath of land for a highway, then you're going to develop all along it. So stopping the 413 would help a lot. Just what I know about the petitions, if you get something like 25 or 30 petitions, signatures on the petition, it means that the opposition can request some debate. So again, it just gives them a chance to raise this issue again. So those legislative petitions are good ones to fill out. But go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, I think there is federal opportunity. The specifics, we're going to have to dig around and see what can be applied. There's a Federal Species at Risk Act. There's federal legislation that governs fisheries generally. There's federal legislation that governs environmental assessment and allows for the possibility of the federal government to do its own environmental assessment of something like the 413. The airport noise forecast zones are federal, and they would presumably be enforced by the federal government. The climate one is a really good one because the federal government has been established by the courts now that it is the one carrying the climate file. You'll remember that Mr. Ford threw $30 million at appealing the carbon fee arrangement that we have in Canada now, and lost, along with a couple of other recalcitrant provinces. The feds, for example, are already legislating that there will be no electricity generated by coal or fossil fuels by 2035, which is counter to where the Ford government seems to be heading at this point of expanding the use of fossil gas to generate electricity. So those pieces are there. If you look at the politics in Canada, one of the best ways of a federal government getting elected is to go after one of the provincial governments that's unpopular. And we need to make sure that this government remains very unpopular, and that will increase the likelihood that we will get some positive things coming out of the federal government, who can take lots of measures. The money primarily is in federal hands. The provinces get a fair bit. They've got an income tax, and they're picking some up from that. But the federal government is where you see money flowing from. It can flow in a lot of different ways. And it can certainly be helpful in terms of a campaign like this. And how exactly this campaign unfolds is still to be seen. I keep thinking that this is the thing that will actually get a government like the provincial Conservatives to take notice is the idea starting to circulate that we don't have to play your political games. We can do direct action to make sure that this doesn't happen. And we've got the public behind us to do that. It's not very difficult. Lots of people have shown it in other places, whether it's in fighting pipelines or whatever. Those kinds of things can be done on development as well. If we want to protect the Greenbelt, we can protect it directly ourselves. And looks like we're going to have assistance from our municipal authorities, municipal staff, and hopefully municipal council as well.
Thanks for that, Don. Does anyone else have any questions or issues they want to raise while we're all here together? Anne. And Anne, make sure you unmute yourself.
Always great to see
There you
everybody
go.
still not giving up, you know. Great, great. You know, I had a thought, being a farmer's daughter, I was quite alarmed but understanding when Mr. Lindsay wants his property to go to be developed. So I'm sitting here wondering, is there any way that we can help the farmers not to sell their property?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And, you know, it's one that I know I've heard people talk about even before the Greenbelt was established in Ontario. There's been that recognition that we don't, the supports, they aren't 360-degree supports, I guess is a good way to put it, when it comes to prime farmland and ensuring that that farmland remains as farmland. And there are other jurisdictions, some in North America, where they've paid more attention to that. And sometimes it's just, you know, in that transition period, as you're realizing that we realize in Ontario, we've lost too much because of urban expansion. We've lost a lot of prime farmland, that there are programs that you can put in place where, for instance, it's gonna take a generation of shifting, so that maybe farmers need to be bought out if they can't farm the land anymore, but they're in a position where they're being pressured to sell that land off to retire or survive. In other jurisdictions, they've started to create, you know, land banks of prime farmland that sometimes are government owned, sometimes end up in land trusts. We've got the Ontario Farmland Trust is a not-for-profit model of that, with the idea being you keep the farmland as farmland in perpetuity, and you provide opportunities for people who are interested in farming to have the land to do it on. Right. So I know that's one thing that we need to talk about more in Ontario and figure out for sure how to see more of that happen. The Greenbelt and its protections were supposed to be a big step in that direction, where at least we'd see farmland within that area protected. But what we're realizing now is that some governments are going to come along and undo those protections. So I think it's an ongoing struggle we need to keep on talking about.
Right. So do farmers in Canada get any subsidization when things are going tough for them?
Yeah, I can't fully answer that question. Others may know more. I think fair to say that yes, that probably does happen in different ways, but I'm guessing it probably varies depending on what kind of farming we're talking about. So we've got Milk Marketing Board as one example, I think, where there are supports in place to ensure that there's a better price for product. But I'm going to be honest, I don't know that. I don't know those systems in detail, so I can't really answer. I don't know if anyone else has a better understanding of that.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I know is that the price of fertilizer has gone crazy, and you can't grow corn without it, because the Ukraine was the biggest, I think, supplier of fertilizer recently. So that's another pressure that's on farmers now. Alex has their hand up.
Yeah,
Hi,
really,
Councillor
really
Wilson.
exciting.
Yeah.
Hello. It's so exciting to see so many folks out. I'm not going to turn my camera on, but you'll believe me that I'm here. But I'm just going to say, I think to answer some of the questions that folks have been posing with at least my 2 cents, is that I'm hearing a lot of support for the city, and that's so wonderful. I'm also really excited that we are not having to push or fight to kind of get to this point. This is our starting point. But I don't think it's still really important to show up at the city level. It's also important to show up in other lenses, but we need folks showing up at the city. And I think there's a reason for this. And it's the questions Anne, Deborah, and others have really been asking us, what's next? What can we keep doing? And so Anne raises an important point, is in part of this moving forward, we've talked about servicing. So the city can hold up servicing. Potentially, we're unclear, but this is like potentially something that can happen by just, we don't have the money to pay for it. You know, if we can't balance a budget, which is another requirement of cities with this servicing, and that we may not have to include it in our budget. So there might be some flexibility there I'm sure lots of folks are seeing to get some clarity on that tomorrow, but there's land transfers as part of sales. So going from a tenant farmer or a farmer to someone else, how can the community, how can our city get engaged at the point of sale? Montreal has right of first refusals. That could be something maybe a city explores, but communities have funded land trusts. Communities have purchased this land and kept it preserved as community owners. Do we have a fundraising campaign in our community's potential? Is that the strategic thing to do next? I don't know. But thinking about where these points are, so there's maybe the sale of the land, there's the servicing of the land, there's the clearance of the land. When is that going to happen? We saw that the one spot in Winona and the Greenbelt already looked adjacent to very cleared lands, if not pretty dusty itself at this point. What can we as a community do, and what can we as a city do to intervene at those moments? There'll be steps that our city can take. There'll be steps that our community can take. The really fun role of community members is you get to help with both, because we're going to need encouraging voices in City Hall delegating in favor of our city doing things. You know, I think it's really, really important that we not take for granted that we still have to walk people through this. We still have to make the argument. It's not just an automatic vote now. There still is the process. It's just a much more hopeful process, is I think what we're all feeling. And so just a note of kind of that's where I'm at, but also a note on kind of there are points to intervene. And I think people who are interested in that, maybe pick one of those points and do a brainstorming or look at what our other cities are doing. And you know, reach out to your counselors and also ask them, what are you going to do to intervene in this part of the process? What are you going to do to intervene in this part of the process? I don't have answers to those questions myself. I'm going to be asking a lot of those questions tomorrow during our meeting on this, but just something to put out there for others looking for what are those next steps. And showing up to the rally on Sunday is so exciting because we're going to be in a huge crowd, and also it's my birthday and I'm really excited to celebrate it all with you.
Nice.
So I'll see you all on Sunday, and just thanks everyone for coming out tonight and for staying engaged and staying so hopeful, because we're the ones, we the people, put this on the agenda in the city of Hamilton, and we're going to be the ones that keep it on the agenda.
Alex, you're a true activist through and through. The fact that you're excited about being at a rally on your birthday, I love it. Before we go to Lucia, I just wanted to say Ash has put a comment in the chat, and I want to make sure we speak to this one. And Ash says, I missed a good portion of the beginning of this. Has any conversation been shared with Indigenous communities about the lands? And I can't, for the Hamilton lands that we're talking about, I can't say specifically for these lands that that there's been any outreach to Indigenous communities. I can tell you we've certainly seen Indigenous people speaking out against the Ford government, against Bill 23, against what's happening. I think, so I know that for sure, and a lot of us are amplifying those messages through our social media, but I wonder if anyone else wants to jump in and respond to that. Maybe as individuals, people have had conversations with others from the Indigenous community on this issue.
Oh, I haven't. I'm just going to put in the. Oh, Dawn just did
there.
it.
Yeah,
There we go.
that's the one I was
just
thinking
about
of,
to put that
Dawn, the
in,
Chiefs
yeah.
of Ontario.
And I believe they took part in a press conference this morning in Toronto with Ontario Climate Emergency Committee. And I'm not sure if they took part in it, but they certainly sent in a statement, which you can read at that link there. So they are involved to some degree.
Okay, thank you for that. Lucia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just had one quick thing that, well, Alex was talking, and I don't know if maybe Alex or someone else, like, you know, Dawn, Linda, Nancy, you guys know the answer. But there was that amendment to Bill 23 around green standards and green building standards. How far does that go? You know, I previously in 350 meetings had, you know, lamented about how we don't have as much leeway on the municipal level to enforce a lot of these things. Does this open that up? Can Hamilton, you know, folks like Alex start pushing for new green standards, or does it just sort of do the bare minimum of making it possible but not likely?
Yeah, I can start and others may want to chime in because I watched some of the discussion in the standing committee when delegations were happening. And a good place to go is the atmospheric fund. They were there. They managed to be able to delegate to the standing committee on Bill 23 because this, I know this was their big concern, and I know City of Toronto as well have been very concerned about this piece. So I'm going to be honest with you in saying that the changes that were coming through the bill were looking like they were going to decimate what opportunity there was there for green development standards. City of Toronto already has a pretty sophisticated system that includes things they can require and really progressive things that they've incentivized for developers of all scales to tap into. And it's if you've never looked, it's really interesting to dig into what's happening at Toronto. With what I saw, there were lots of there were MPPs on that committee who passionately spoke against what was being proposed and warned the Ford government members of the standing committee that what you've got in the bill is going to wipe this out. It's awful. So I haven't circled back to see where things landed, but from what I was hearing, with some of the amendments that the Ford government came up with, the protections that I've heard or the green development opportunities that I've heard are still intact are green roofs and the bird-friendly building features. But that's still a huge loss, right? Because there were all kinds of other elements there that, you know, around buildings and you know, energy conservation in buildings and those kinds of pieces. And really we were wanting to head in a direction where we springboard and strengthen those abilities of municipalities to do this kind of important work. So I think at the end of the day, from what I've heard, you know, it really was a loss rather than any kind of a gain. Okay, there were a couple of other okay, there's Alex saying, yeah, basically just green roofs are allowed. That about sums it up. There were a few other comments. There was a question in the chat about, and I think we probably don't know the answer. Someone was wondering, you know, will all of the councillors be there on Sunday? And is it fair to say we know Alex is going to be there? We're going to have to sing happy birthday, but Nancy and Dawn, have you heard about any other councillors who are likely or who have already said, I'll be there?
Go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, Nancy, you're muted.
So far, we've seen Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Alex Wilson, Craig Kassar, Taddison was at our rally yesterday. John Paul Danko has shown up to rallies. So I think we know who's on our side. Oh yes, and Councillor Crutch. Yeah, there's probably about 3 who might not want to come. Not sure. I'd say that we've got a majority this time.
Okay, thanks for that. Susan has a question around, would lands that might be bought and put in trust be vulnerable to expropriation? And that's a good question. I suppose any land could be expropriated by government. Oh my gosh, can you imagine if people rallied and put land into a trust to protect it? And although, you know, maybe there's a parallel happening now with that pressure on conservation authorities to and their land holdings and, you know, circling around. And, you know, I've heard people talk about, well, you know, what if these are properties that are now being protected by conservation authorities, but it happened through community donations and fundraising. We're almost in a realm right now where that risk is there for lots of that kind of land. But does anyone want to comment further on that issue of expropriation?
Well, that and you mentioned, you know, people that have donated their land. Yeah, I'm sure that's part of what you're saying, but
yeah,
I just think that's, yeah, odious, another odious part of this.
There's at least an understood covenant where lands are donated for permanent protection or fundraised and purchased for permanent protection, for them to be put up, for the province to intervene and say, well, now we're going to put them on the market and turn them into subdivisions. I think that would be open to legal challenge at least. And that may be one of the elements that we see. There may be other forms of legal challenge that can be pursued here to counter what they are, the province is doing to various specific things. And when you start passing laws that say you are not permitted to give advice to municipal governments, which is one of the things they've done for conservation authorities, that one strikes me as pretty open to challenge. That you're starting to dictate to a public body that it can't do something which it's done for decades, and which is obviously a public benefit.
Yeah, good point, Don. And I've heard people, with what you're describing in that gagging of conservation authorities and people asking questions around liability. What happens if we don't have these same solid, advising decision-making structures, and it results in development in locations where, people could be in peril because of that lack of consideration of issues like, extreme weather, flooding, and those kinds of problems.
And that's happened. It's happened in Hamilton. We've had situations where a conservation authority has been sued because a developer built too close to a floodplain and units started to collapse into the floodplain. So those kinds of, provincial government can look very powerful and strong, but there are various things that can rein them in. And we've seen that in terms of other legal challenges that have either succeeded or failed, but they expose that the levers of power are not necessarily just, I'm in charge so I can do what I please.
Yeah. And maybe this dovetails nicely into that last comment, Don. Martha asks, is there not a way to get rid of a premier besides voting him out? Could there, who wants to take a stab at that one? I'm going to say within because it's a majority government, would it not require a non-confidence vote? I don't know how likely that is.
Well, we have seen a very popular, very powerful, very full of himself premier in Alberta who is no longer part of the picture.
Yeah, good point.
And these things can happen if this is causing enough pain to the Conservative Party across the province. They may recognize that the problem is the premier, or they may decide it's the premier. Personally, I think we're much wiser to blame it on the whole party, because every one of them is out there voting and they're making the decision. No decisions get passed by a vote of a single premier. All decisions in the legislature have to have a majority of the legislature vote for them. And that means at this point, members of the Progressive Conservative Party. There should be, and I'm always remembering that we used to have a Prime Minister of Canada who was a Conservative. His name was, I can't remember his last name. He was known as Lion Brian. And he got one of the biggest majorities in Canadian history. And in the next election, there were 2 Conservatives across the entire country elected. So you can destroy, and that party has never come back. It ended up being absorbed into the Reform Party and so on. Politicians are not immune. Can't just do what they please.
Thanks for that, Don. And I see your hand up again. But make sure you unmute.
You'd think I'd know about that right now, wouldn't you? Well, that's one way to shut me up. But anyway, I just noticed a comment in here by a gentleman named Cameron regarding people who have donated lands to conservation authorities. So if somebody donated a piece of land to conservation authority, does the government have the authority to remove that and have it built upon? That was just something I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this concern raised, and I want to say, unfortunately, yes, because conservation authorities, that we have a Provincial Conservation Authorities Act. So my understanding is that the province does have some level of control. I mean, we're seeing it, right, with the gagging of conservation authorities. They do have some level of control over those entities because they are creatures of the province, even though province is definitely not the full funder of the conservation authorities. Municipal levies are really important. So yeah, I mean, my understanding is that could happen. In fact, I think there are fears that we may see that. Dawn, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mentioned before, I think there's a covenant there that would be certainly a basis to talk to a lawyer in terms of how you might fight that kind of thing. Again, and if you look at funding of conservation authorities, the Hamilton Conservation Authority, which we're most familiar with, 3% of their budget comes from the provincial government. So they're not the funders. They're not the ones who are holding the purse strings in that way. These are entities that are largely funded by municipal governments and by fees that they collect, camping fees and
Yeah, thanks for that,
so
Dawn.
on.
So we're running out of time, but I want to make sure that I read Ash's comment here before we wrap up. And Ash says, if there's talk of community land purchases, these should include considerations of placing lands back in the care of land defenders and protectors across the Six Nations. And Ash says, I would be interested to know if these organizing groups listed here tonight are able to bridge a conversation with, say, for example, 1492 land back. Yes, I know that there are people on this call who are active in organizations that include individuals who have been engaged on 1492 land back. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and speak to that, but I think you're raising a really important point, Ash, that this is something that we all need to continue to think about and figure out how we can do a better job of pulling Indigenous voices into the conversation.
I can't really speak much to it. I have been in contact in the past with Skylar for various things and for going out there. I know Dawn has as well, but I also know that people are busy fighting their fights. We're all fighting our own fights on so many different fronts, and trying to get people engaged on our issue sometimes is difficult because they're fighting their own battles too. So that's just my observation of from reaching out to people, but others might have a different experience anyhow.
Thanks for that, Nancy. I guess too, I mean, I guess I'm hopeful we'll keep fighting and get to the point where we're looking at moving forward solutions and new systems and frameworks so that we don't end up, spiraling back down into a situation like this where there's so much at risk because of provincial government and what they're doing. Although I guess the frustration is rarely, if ever, do we have that luxury of being able to have those positive conversations. So it's, figuring out how do you make sure that, even when there are not just little fires, but lots of big fires to put out, that we're doing our best to connect with key players whose voices need to be heard. I think it's important. All right, well, it's 8:42 and I do see one more question from Eileen. So I'm going to put that one out there and then maybe we'll draw the session to a close. Eileen says, do farmers still want to farm given the added stress of climate change? For example, Southern Ontario was in a state of drought this summer. It's a very big question. Hopefully they do.
I've spoken to a lot because I literally just started driving up people's driveways during the Stop Sprawl thing, and I was nervous about what reception I would get because I was worried that farmers did want to sell. But the ones that I've spoken to, and Janice just popped her message in there too, is that overwhelmingly the farmers that I've spoken to do want to, because it's not a job, it's their way of life. Basically, you know, we're asking, do you want to give up your way of life and just go live in the city? And they don't. They don't. So the vast majority of farmers that I've spoken to, absolutely. One of them, when I drove up his driveway and introduced myself and what I do, he said, I have 3 levels of protection here. The Greenbelt, which we now realize isn't quite as protective as we thought. The Conservation Authority, his land was in 3 different jurisdictions, and he was adamant he was going to be passing that land down to his kids, and his 2 kids were there. They were in their 20s and they're ready to go. So yes, I believe so. And that's what Janice just says too.
Yeah, challenging now. I did say we're going to wrap up, but I saw Ash's hand up. So Ash, I want to give you a chance to speak, to verbalize your comments and questions and concerns.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me?
Hello. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Hi, thank you so much. I appreciate you reading some of the comments, and I'm learning so much and considering so much this generous conversation this evening. I think when I listened to Dawn share sort of sentiments about, like, we've got to keep people in this province being disgruntled with the government, like being upset with and disappointed with the government. I agree with that. And it makes me think about all the different groups. And I'm sorry that I think it was Nancy who was just talking. I'm not catching everyone's names, but about, you know, the idea that we all have our own causes and we're all fighting, you know, in the ways that we can to bring voice and to amplify those causes. And I think that's so true. I'm a part of the queer community, and the work I do both in advocacy and in my daily paid labor is to advocate on behalf of 2S LGBTQ communities, which are also being attacked and undermined within the context of many decisions made by this government and conservative politicians in the areas. And so I guess I'm thinking through, you know, I think on the one hand, it is true that our bandwidth is so limited, and we're all fighting these causes that are so, like, deeply passionate to and connected to us in this, like, one particular way or a couple particular ways. And I'm also interested in, like, how do we let these other spaces know that, like, you know, what everything you've shared tonight is transferable to these other contexts. And I'm immediately thinking of, like, oh, I need to, this very exact workshop or this conversation or seminar or sharing in the context of trans advocacy, queer advocacy, could benefit the spaces. And so I guess I'm just thinking through some of those links when I say bridging that community. And it might just look like sending an email after tonight to another organization saying, hey, 40, 50 people met last night, and this is what we talked about, and these are the things we covered, and these are the things we talked about, and we wanted to share it with you.
Yeah.
And something as simple as that. So those are just some that I just wanted to sort of share, that both as, like, things I'm thinking through, but also the value that I'm getting from all of this. So thanks so much.
Yeah, no, that's you're raising a really important point and a powerful one, because you're right. I think a lot of us have been talking about that, you know, that idea of building the movement beyond, you know, across movements. And I think with the strikes, with the education workers, I think a lot of us started to think, hey, wait a minute, how do we, from so many different perspectives, this government is impacting on so many of us. But you're right there. I think I agree with you. There's power in bringing everyone together and supporting each other and recognizing that they're harmful in this huge way, but we've got that collective power, and we need to figure out how to harness it, probably now more than ever, right? It's critical that we start to understand how to do that more effectively. So thank you for sharing that. It's great. Okay. I think in fairness, because we are now at 10, we're almost at 9 o'clock. So I'm feeling like we probably should wrap up, unless there are burning questions. There are lots of great comments in the chat. But I'm feeling, Nancy and Dawn, I'm feeling like we should wrap it up for tonight. But what we will do is, as I said, we'll get that action sheet out to all of you via email. So everyone who registered, we'll push that email out. We'll also make it publicly available, because that's important. And it'll have all the resources that you need. And good luck with preparing your comments, and feel free, maybe I'll include our emails. I can say for me, for sure, I'm comfortable doing that. I'll ask Nancy and Dawn if they are too. We'll include emails so that you can reach out to us if you're preparing comments and you just want to use one of us as a sounding board. We'll make sure that support is there for you as well. But on that note, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Great that so many of you came out and that you care. And onwards, I guess, is what I feel like I need to say now. And enjoy the rest of your night and watch for our action sheet. So thank you, everyone. And I can, I guess, stop the recording now.